My name is Charlotte Morgan. I am 34 years old. I work as a corporate cybersecurity auditor in Seattle, Washington. Most people hear that title and assume I spend my days resetting passwords or telling employees not to click suspicious emails. I usually let them think that. The truth is far less ordinary. My job is to investigate corporate fraud hidden inside computer systems. When millions of dollars disappear when executives insist they know nothing. When digital records somehow rewrite themselves overnight, I'm one of the people companies hire to uncover what actually happened. I've spent 12 years learning one simple lesson. People lie. Systems remember. Ironically, I never imagined the most important investigation of my life wouldn't begin inside a corporation. It would begin at my own birthday dinner. I turned 34 on a rainy Thursday in October. My mother insisted we celebrate at the Grand Bellevue Hotel overlooking Elliott Bay. She called it a small family dinner. There were 23 guests: my mother Evelyn, my stepfather Richard, my younger sister Olivia, aunts, uncles, family friends, even a few business associates my mother claimed were practically family. Everything looked perfect. Fresh white orchids decorated the table. Crystal glasses reflected the city lights. A string quartet played softly near the windows. Anyone walking past the private dining room would have assumed they were looking at a happy family celebrating another birthday. I knew better. My mother never spent that much money unless she expected something in return. For most of the evening, she smiled too much. She kept asking the waiters to refill everyone's wine. She toasted my health. She thanked everyone for coming. She even hugged me twice. That alone should have warned me. Then dessert arrived. The candles on my birthday cake had barely finished burning when my mother nodded toward one of the hotel attendants. He disappeared through a side door and returned carrying a black leather portfolio. He didn't hand it to me. He gave it directly to my mother. She smiled as though she were presenting the final birthday surprise. "I have one last gift for you." She slid the portfolio across the table. Inside was a thick legal document covered with yellow signature tabs. Every page that required my name had already been marked. I looked up. "What is this?" "It's just paperwork." She said it casually. "Nothing complicated." I opened to the first page. Before I could read a single paragraph, she placed her hand firmly over the document. "Don't worry about the details. Just sign where I've marked." I laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. "I'm not signing anything without reading it." Her smile disappeared instantly. "You don't need to read it." "I absolutely do." The room became strangely quiet. Even the musicians outside seemed to have stopped playing. My mother leaned closer. "It protects the family." I looked down at the stack of papers again. "If it protects everyone, then it won't matter if I spend 15 minutes reading it." For several seconds, she simply stared at me. Then her voice turned cold. "Charlotte, sign it." "No." My stepfather finally spoke. "Your mother worked very hard putting this together." "I'm sure she did." I gently pulled the folder closer. "I'll read every page. Then I'll decide." Before I could turn the first page, my mother slammed her palm onto the document. The sound echoed across the dining room. Not hard enough to hurt me, just hard enough that everyone looked over. "You've always been like this." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Always questioning. Always making everything more difficult than it needs to be. I looked around the table. My aunt lowered her eyes. My uncle suddenly became fascinated by his wine glass. Olivia wouldn't even look at me. Nobody said a word. Not one person asked why I wasn't allowed to read a legal document with my own name on it. My mother slowly stood. "If you refuse to trust your own family," she pointed toward the door, "then you don't belong at this table." The room froze. I waited. Surely someone would tell her she was overreacting. Surely someone would remind her this was my birthday. Nobody did. Richard looked away. Olivia remained perfectly still. One of my cousins quietly reached over and blew out the last candle still flickering on my untouched cake, as if the evening were already over. I closed the portfolio, stood up, picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Then I looked directly at my mother. "You chose tonight because you thought I'd panic." She frowned. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I gave a small smile. "I think you do." Without another word, I walked toward the door. No one followed me. No one called my name. The hotel hallway felt strangely peaceful after the silence inside that room. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from my closest friend, Noah Grant. "Everything okay?" I looked at the closed elevator doors for a moment before typing back. "Better than okay? Tell me." The executive dining room still archives security footage with audio, right? His reply came almost instantly. Every second. Why I smiled for the first time that night. Because while everyone inside that room believed they had just witnessed a stubborn daughter destroying her own birthday, I knew something they didn't. The hotel's security system had quietly recorded every word, every threat, and every hand that tried to force me to sign. And before this was over, those cameras were going to tell a very different story. The truth is, my mother didn't become controlling overnight. She simply became better at hiding it. When I was a little girl, she used to tell people I was independent. It sounded like a compliment. Looking back, I realize it meant something very different. Independent children don't ask for help. Independent children don't complain. Independent children quietly solve their own problems so nobody has to pay attention to them. My biological father, Thomas Morgan, was the exact opposite. He believed questions were a sign of intelligence, not disrespect. He was the founder of a cybersecurity consulting company long before most businesses even understood what cyber threats were. When I was 12, he gave me my first laptop instead of a birthday necklace. "Computers leave footprints," he used to tell me. "People do too. Your job is learning which ones matter." He never handed me answers. Instead, he'd place a puzzle in front of me and leave the room. A week later, I'd solve it. Another puzzle would appear. That was his way of teaching. Unfortunately, I didn't get nearly enough time with him. He died suddenly when I was 16 after suffering a massive heart attack during a business conference in San Francisco. One phone call, one flight, one funeral. And suddenly, the safest person in my life was gone. Within a year, my mother married Richard. Richard wasn't cruel. He simply believed that keeping Evelyn happy was easier than disagreeing with her. Little by little, the house changed. Dad's books disappeared. His photographs moved into storage. His office became a guest room. His company was sold to another technology firm, and my mother often described it as an old chapter that needed to close. I stopped correcting her, because every correction somehow became another argument. The older I became, the more obvious the comparisons were. My younger sister Olivia could do almost anything and receive applause. She earned average grades. Mom called her gifted. She organized one charity bake sale. Mom introduced her as a future nonprofit leader. She changed jobs 3 times in 2 years. Mom described her as exploring leadership opportunities. Meanwhile, my accomplishments always seemed to shrink whenever my mother talked about them. If relatives asked about my work, she'd smile politely. "Charlotte works in IT. Sometimes it became, she fixes computer problems. Other times, she's basically the technology girl." Technology girl. As though my entire career involved restarting printers. The first time I tried explaining what I actually did, my mother interrupted before I finished. "Oh, don't bore everyone with technical details. They wouldn't understand." The room laughed politely. I smiled because it was easier. Later that night, I sat in my childhood bedroom wondering why success always felt strangely lonely whenever I came home. Eventually, I stopped talking about work altogether. It wasn't worth the effort. Ironically, the less my family knew about my career, the more successful I became. After college, I joined a cybersecurity firm in Seattle as a junior analyst. I worked ridiculous hours. 70-hour weeks became normal. While friends traveled or took vacations, I spent weekends investigating ransomware attacks, financial breaches, and insider fraud. 3 years later, I was promoted. Then, promoted again. Eventually, insurance companies, investment firms, and Fortune 500 corporations started hiring me to investigate digital fraud cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Around that same time, two former colleagues approached me with an idea. They wanted to build AI software capable of detecting financial manipulation before human auditors could. It sounded ambitious, almost impossible. I invested my savings, not because I expected to become wealthy, because I believed in the idea. For 7 years, we quietly built the platform. No magazine interviews, no flashy product launches, no social media. We stayed invisible, exactly the way I preferred. Then, 3 months before my 34th birthday, everything changed. One of the largest cybersecurity companies in the country offered to acquire us. The negotiations lasted nearly 11 weeks. Lawyers reviewed every line. Auditors examined every account. By the end of the process, my minority ownership had become worth more money than I had ever imagined. When the final agreements were signed, I stared at the number on the closing statement for almost 5 full minutes. $65 million. After taxes, the amount was smaller. Still more money than anyone in my family believed existed. I told no one. Not my mother, not Richard, not Olivia. The fewer people who knew, the safer it remained. Instead, I quietly placed the proceeds into escrow while searching for something I'd wanted ever since my father died. A place that belonged to no one else's memories. A place where nobody could tell me I didn't belong. That search eventually led me to Glass Point Estate. Perched on a secluded stretch of Washington's San Juan Islands, the property overlooked the Pacific with cliffs, evergreen forests, a restored stone manor, private docks, and enough land to feel like its own small world. Most buyers saw luxury. I saw distance, peace, freedom. I toured it under a confidential purchasing agreement 6 weeks before my birthday. The deal moved quickly. Inspections were completed. Financing wasn't necessary. Closing was scheduled for the morning after my birthday dinner. The timing was almost absurd. On the very night my family expected me to surrender control over my future, I was only hours away from legally purchasing the first place I would ever call entirely my own. Of course, none of them knew that. And judging by the leather folder my mother slid across the birthday table, she was counting on exactly that. I didn't drive home after leaving the hotel. Instead, I headed toward the waterfront where my consulting office overlooked Elliott Bay. Most of the lights in the building were off by then. Only the security desk remained staffed. The night guard smiled as I walked in. "Working late again, Charlotte." "You could say that." My office occupied a quiet corner on the 9th floor, glass walls, minimal furniture, two large monitors, a bookshelf filled with digital forensics manuals that almost nobody ever touched except me. I locked the door behind me and placed the leather portfolio on my desk. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. Another part remembered my father's favorite rule: never examine suspicious documents while you're emotionally compromised. So I made coffee first, changed into a sweater I kept in the office, reviewed 3 work emails. Only then did I return to the folder. The first page immediately confirmed what I'd suspected. It wasn't a birthday surprise. It wasn't even close. Buried inside nearly 40 pages of legal language was a clause appointing my mother's family office as temporary financial manager over a broad range of my assets, under vaguely defined circumstances related to emotional distress and major financial decision-making. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was astonishingly bold. Someone had spent months drafting this. Someone expected me to sign it without reading a single word. My phone buzzed. This time it wasn't Noah. It was Benjamin Cole, the attorney who had represented my father for almost 20 years. I answered immediately. "Charlotte." His voice sounded unusually calm. "I heard about dinner." I frowned. "How?" "Let's just say your father prepared for more possibilities than you realize." He paused. "I think it's time we meet." "What do you mean, tomorrow?" "After your property closing. There's something your father left behind." Something I wasn't authorized to show you, unless someone tried to make you surrender control of your assets. I slowly looked back down at the contract lying open on my desk. For the second time that night, I had the unmistakable feeling that my father had somehow seen this moment coming years before it happened, and somehow, he had already planned my next move. The next morning began with two signatures. The first changed where I lived. The second changed everything I thought I knew about my father. At 8:30 a.m., I walked into the closing attorney's office overlooking Elliott Bay. The conference room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished oak. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the marina where ferries crossed the water beneath a gray October sky. The transaction itself took less than 40 minutes. Every document had already been reviewed weeks earlier. Every inspection had been completed. Every wire transfer had cleared overnight. At exactly 9:11 a.m., the attorney smiled and slid the final folder toward me. "Congratulations, Ms. Morgan. Glass Point Estate officially belongs to you." For just a second, I didn't answer. Instead, I looked down at the deed. For years, my mother had used our last name as a reminder that everything important belonged to the family. This time, the name belonged only to me. No trust controlled by my mother. No approval required. No conditions attached. I shook the attorney's hand before walking outside. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Benjamin Cole. I'm waiting. His office was only 15 minutes away. Benjamin had known my father since they were in law school together. Growing up, I remembered him as the quiet man who always brought chess sets instead of toys whenever he visited. Dad used to joke that Benjamin never gave children presents. He gives them problems to solve. Benjamin greeted me with the same calm smile I'd known since childhood. "You look tired." It was a long birthday. I imagine it was. He closed the office door behind me. On his conference table sat a single dark blue document box. No labels, no markings. Just a brass key resting on top. "I've been waiting 18 years to open this with you." I frowned. 18? The instructions were very specific. He picked up an envelope. Thomas believed some conversations should happen only after events, not birthdays. He instructed me to wait until one of two things happened. He held up one finger. "You turned 40. Then another. Or someone attempted to pressure you into surrendering financial control." I stared at him. He actually wrote that. Benjamin handed me the letter. It was unmistakably my father's handwriting. If Charlotte is reading this, before 40 someone has forced her hand. My chest tightened. Benjamin continued. "Your father understood contracts better than almost anyone I've ever represented. He also understood people. He worried less about strangers than he did about those who believed they deserved access simply because they were family." Inside the document box were dozens of neatly organized folders, trust agreements, corporate ownership records, investment summaries, letters. One folder immediately caught my attention: Emergency Asset Protection Trust. Benjamin opened it carefully. 3 months before your father died, he transferred a significant portion of his private investments into an independent trust. I looked up. "I've never heard about this." "You weren't supposed to. He wanted you to build your own career without relying on inherited wealth. But he also wanted to make sure nobody could manipulate you into giving away what was legally yours." Benjamin slid another document across the table. One paragraph had already been highlighted. I read it twice, then a third time. "Should any individual attempt through coercion, deception, emotional pressure, or misuse of familial authority to obtain control over Charlotte Morgan's assets or legal decision-making, the trust shall immediately activate enhanced protective provisions under independent legal administration." I slowly looked up. He expected this. Benjamin nodded. He hoped he was wrong. But he planned as though he wasn't. Before I could ask another question, he reached beneath the table and lifted a second folder. This one was much thinner. "The trust isn't the only thing your father left." "What is it?" A question. He placed the folder in front of me. I think you're about to discover why your mother wanted that contract signed before you had time to read it. For the next hour, Benjamin and I reviewed every page. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Corporate filings, property inventories, investment schedules, everything appeared meticulously organized. Then Benjamin stopped on a document dated almost 14 years earlier. Look at this signature. I leaned closer. It was my mother's, authorizing changes to one of my father's holding companies only 3 weeks after his funeral. That's strange. Benjamin nodded. It gets stranger. He opened another folder, this time containing correspondence between attorneys. Several assets your father intended to remain outside the family estate were quietly redirected over the following 5 years. My stomach tightened. Legally, Benjamin hesitated. That's what I've been trying to determine. He spread several diagrams across the conference table. Money moved between charitable foundations, consulting companies, investment partnerships. Everything eventually led toward a privately managed family office controlled by one person, Evelyn Morgan. I always assumed these were legitimate restructurings. Benjamin sighed. But after what happened at your birthday dinner, I'm no longer comfortable making that assumption. Silence settled across the room. Finally, I asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. Do you think she planned this? Benjamin didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window overlooking Seattle. I think people rarely spend 6 months drafting legal documents unless they've already spent years imagining the outcome. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was Noah Grant. I answered. Morning. You sitting down? Why? I called someone at the Grand Bellevue. My pulse quickened. And they've preserved every second of last night's executive dining room footage. I smiled faintly. Good. No. His voice became unusually serious. You need to see it. What happened after you walked out? Is far more interesting than what happened before. Benjamin slowly turned around. He had heard enough of the conversation to understand. When can we watch it? Noah answered before I could. I'm already on my way. And if the cameras captured what I think they did, your mother may have just provided us with the evidence she spent years trying to hide. Noah arrived less than 30 minutes later carrying a slim black laptop and a portable encrypted drive. He had been one of my closest friends since graduate school. While I spent my career investigating financial fraud inside digital systems, Noah built those systems. For the last 8 years, he had served as Director of Security Technologies for the Grand Bellevue Hotel. If anyone understood surveillance evidence, it was him. He set the laptop on Benjamin's conference table without saying a word. You were right, he finally said. The cameras recorded everything. Benjamin folded his arms. Video only. Noah shook his head. Video and synchronized audio. I felt my pulse quicken. How many cameras? 8. Every angle inside the executive dining room, the hallway, the private entrance, and the waiting lounge. He connected the encrypted drive. A security program opened. 8 synchronized camera feeds appeared on the screen. The timestamp began 15 minutes before dinner. Guests arriving, servers pouring wine, family members greeting each other. Everything looked completely ordinary. Noah skipped ahead. Let's go to the contract. The recording shifted. There I was, sitting quietly at the table, my mother sliding the black leather portfolio toward me. Benjamin watched silently. Noah increased the volume. Every word was perfectly clear. It's just paperwork. Nothing complicated. Then came my reply. What am I signing? The room speakers captured every syllable. When my mother covered the first page with her hand, Noah paused the video. You see this? He zoomed in. Her palm completely blocked the opening paragraph. You never had a chance to read it. Benjamin nodded. Exactly. Noah pressed play again. The conversation continued. Just sign where I've marked. I'm not signing anything I haven't read. Then came the sound that made everyone in Benjamin's office go silent. The sharp crack of my mother's hand striking the folder. Even through the speakers it sounded violent. Not physically, psychologically. Benjamin quietly exhaled. Coercion. Noah nodded. And keep watching. The footage continued until I stood up, picked up my coat, walked toward the exit. The hallway camera followed me, leaving the private dining room. I disappeared around the corner. Then Noah clicked another camera angle. Back inside. The door had barely closed behind me. My mother's entire expression changed. The smile disappeared. She leaned back in her chair. Richard laughed first, a quiet laugh, almost relieved. Then Olivia spoke. I honestly thought she'd argue longer. Mom smiled. She always comes back. Richard picked up the contract from the table. What if she actually reads it? Mom didn't hesitate. She won't. She never reads family paperwork. Benjamin slowly turned toward me. Interesting. Noah continued the recording. Richard flipped through several pages. If she signs. Everything transfers before the acquisition money arrives. My entire body froze. Acquisition money. They knew, not the exact amount, but they knew I was about to receive something valuable. Mom nodded confidently. We've waited long enough. Once the family office manages her assets, she won't even realize what she's agreed to. Olivia laughed. Then she can finally stop pretending she's smarter than everyone. The room fell completely silent. Noah paused the recording. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Benjamin asked the obvious question. How did they know about the acquisition? I slowly shook my head. I never told them. Neither did my business partners. Noah looked at me. Someone was watching. Benjamin replayed the final 10 minutes 3 separate times. Not because he doubted what we'd heard, because experienced attorneys never rely on first impressions. Every sentence mattered. Every pause mattered. Every glance across the table mattered. On the third viewing, Benjamin suddenly held up one hand. Wait. Noah froze the frame. Richard was standing near the dessert table while everyone believed dinner had ended. He reached into his inside jacket pocket, removed his phone, sent a text message. Benjamin pointed toward the screen. Can we enlarge that? Noah zoomed carefully. The hotel cameras were remarkably sharp, not enough to read the message itself, but enough to identify the recipient's name at the top of the screen. Harper Legal Group. Benjamin frowned. I know that firm. So do I. They specialize in emergency conservatorships. I felt the blood drain from my face. Benjamin looked at me. The document wasn't the only plan. If you refused to sign, they were already preparing another option. Noah clicked forward another 30 seconds. Another camera overlooking the hallway activated. Richard stepped outside the dining room. His phone rang almost immediately. The audio from the hallway microphone was surprisingly clear. It's Richard. No. She refused. I know. Start preparing the petition anyway. Benjamin slowly removed his glasses. There it is. The financial incapacity petition. I stared at the screen. So, they planned both outcomes. Benjamin nodded. If you signed, they gained contractual control. If you refused, they intended to convince a court you were emotionally unstable. Noah leaned back in his chair. They built a trap where every path led to the same destination. Benjamin closed the laptop halfway before stopping. Actually, I think they made one mistake. What? They forgot something your father understood very well. He looked directly at me. Every fraud collapses the moment someone stops believing the story and starts following the evidence. He reopened the laptop one final time. This footage is authentic. It's time-stamped. It has an unbroken chain of custody. It came directly from the hotel's secured servers. He smiled for the first time all morning. Charlotte, I believe your mother just built our entire case for us. At that moment, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Charlotte Morgan. Yes. My name is Allison Reed. I'm an attorney with Harper Legal Group. I looked at Benjamin. He slowly nodded for me to keep listening. We've been instructed to schedule an urgent meeting regarding your financial capacity. I couldn't help smiling. I'm sorry, I replied calmly. I think you're about 24 hours too late. Before she could answer, I ended the call. Benjamin laughed quietly. They have no idea that the cameras have already testified. Benjamin didn't waste a single hour. By that afternoon, every piece of evidence had been duplicated, authenticated, and secured. 3 encrypted copies of the hotel footage. 1 remained with Noah under the hotel's chain of custody procedures. 1 stayed in Benjamin's firm's evidence vault. The 3rd was stored in an independent digital escrow service in case anyone ever questioned its authenticity. If someone tries to claim the recordings were edited, Benjamin explained, we'll have 3 separate verification paths. I smiled. My father would have liked you saying that. Benjamin chuckled. He usually said it first. The next 48 hours became a blur of legal filings. Instead of waiting for my mother's conservatorship petition to gain momentum, Benjamin made the first move. He filed an emergency injunction preventing anyone from acting on the unsigned agreement. He also requested that the court preserve all communications related to the document prepared for my birthday dinner. That request changed everything, because now deleting evidence could become its own legal problem. Meanwhile, Noah quietly contacted the Grand Bellevue's legal department. After reviewing the recordings themselves, the hotel's general counsel made a decision that surprised even him. The hotel would certify the CCTV footage as authentic and provide sworn affidavits regarding the recording system, the timestamps, and the uninterrupted storage process. They're protecting themselves, Noah explained. If lawyers start arguing the footage was manipulated, it affects every surveillance system the hotel operates. For the first time since my birthday, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because the fight was over, because the truth no longer depended only on me. The evidence could speak for itself. 3 days later, my mother invited nearly everyone involved to what she called a family reconciliation meeting. It was scheduled in the boardroom of the Morgan Family Foundation. The invitation described it as an opportunity to clear up misunderstandings before unnecessary legal action damages the family's reputation. Benjamin laughed when he read it. She isn't trying to save the family. She's trying to save the narrative. He accepted the invitation on my behalf. When we arrived that Friday morning, almost 30 people were already seated around the long conference table. Foundation board members, family attorneys, my aunt and uncle, several longtime donors, even 2 financial advisors my mother had worked with for years. She had expected an emotional daughter. Instead, I arrived with Benjamin Noah and 2 litigation specialists carrying sealed evidence cases. My mother's smile faded almost instantly. Charlotte, she said, forcing a pleasant tone, I'm so glad you came. I almost didn't. She gestured toward an empty chair. Let's settle this privately, Benjamin answered before I could. Everything discussed today will be part of the legal record. The room immediately became quieter. My mother folded her hands. I think my daughter has misunderstood a few documents. I looked directly at her. Then why wasn't I allowed to read them? She hesitated for half a second. I was only trying to save time. Benjamin calmly placed the unsigned contract on the table. Would you like to explain why nearly every signature page was marked, while the authority clauses were buried 31 pages into the agreement? No answer. Instead, my mother looked toward Richard. He shifted uncomfortably. Then she looked at Olivia. Neither of them spoke. Benjamin nodded once. I thought so. He turned toward Noah. Noah. Without saying a word, Noah connected a small media player to the conference room projector. The first image appeared on the large screen. A timestamp. The Grand Bellevue Hotel. Executive Dining Room, October 14th, 8:37 p.m. My mother's face changed instantly. She recognized it before anyone else did. "What is this?" one board member asked. "Hotel security footage," Noah replied. "Certified and preserved under legal chain of custody." Benjamin looked around the room. "I'd like everyone to watch before drawing any conclusions." The recording began. The room watched my mother slide the leather portfolio toward me. They watched me ask what I was signing. They watched her stop me from reading the contract. No one spoke. Then came the unmistakable sound of her hand striking the folder. Several people visibly flinched. One of the foundation directors quietly whispered, "My God!" The footage continued. Every sentence, every demand, every threat. Then everyone watched me stand, pick up my coat, and leave. For several seconds, the screen went silent. Then the next camera angle appeared. The conversation after I had already walked away, Richard laughing, Olivia smiling, my mother's voice saying, "She always comes back." Then, "If she signs, everything transfers before the acquisition money arrives." The boardroom became absolutely still. One donor slowly removed his glasses. Another director leaned forward as though he hadn't heard correctly. Then came the hallway recording, Richard's phone call. "No," she refused. "Start preparing the petition anyway." Benjamin stopped the video. No dramatic speech followed. He simply looked around the room. "Does anyone here still believe this was a birthday celebration?" Nobody answered. Because for the first time, everyone had watched the same truth. Not through family gossip, not through accusations, through 8 silent cameras that remembered every word my family wished they could now take back. The meeting at the Morgan Family Foundation ended 20 minutes later. No one argued. No one defended my mother. Most people simply gathered their belongings and quietly walked out of the boardroom, avoiding eye contact with everyone else. The CCTV footage had done something no speech ever could. It had removed opinion from the conversation. By Monday morning, the consequences had already begun. The Foundation's board voted unanimously to place my mother on immediate administrative leave, pending an independent investigation. Her authority over every financial account was suspended. Richard was removed as an authorized signer on all Foundation transactions until auditors completed their review. Olivia's proposed wellness initiative, which had been scheduled to receive nearly $4 million in Foundation funding, was frozen indefinitely. My mother called me 17 times that day. I answered none of them. Instead, Benjamin and I prepared for the court hearing. As expected, Harper Legal Group officially filed the petition claiming I was emotionally unstable after making irrational financial decisions, and therefore required temporary financial oversight. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so calculated. Their evidence consisted mostly of opinions. Ours consisted of facts. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom felt surprisingly calm. The judge began by reviewing the petition. Then she turned to Harper's lead attorney. "Please explain why the respondent allegedly lacks financial capacity." The attorney stood confidently. "Your Honor, Ms. Morgan recently made an impulsive purchase of a luxury estate worth tens of millions of dollars." The judge looked toward me. "Ms. Morgan, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And when was the purchase agreement negotiated?" Benjamin stood. "With the court's permission?" He handed the clerk a thick folder. "The negotiations began 11 weeks before the birthday dinner," he continued. "The inspections were completed 6 weeks before. The financing documents were finalized nearly a month before. The closing date was scheduled long before any disagreement with her family." The judge slowly reviewed the timeline. "So the purchase wasn't impulsive." Benjamin smiled politely. "No, Your Honor. It was one of the most carefully documented transactions I've ever supervised." Harper's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Then Benjamin requested permission to present additional evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the hotel's CCTV footage appeared on the courtroom monitors. No commentary, no dramatic music, just the original recordings. The judge watched my mother refuse to let me read the agreement. She watched Richard discuss transferring control of my future acquisition proceeds. She watched the hallway phone call, instructing someone to prepare a conservatorship petition before anyone had ever evaluated my mental state. When the final clip ended, the courtroom remained completely silent. The judge removed her glasses. She looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Morgan, am I correct in understanding that the conservatorship petition was being discussed before your daughter had even declined the agreement in writing?" My mother's attorney attempted to object. The judge raised one hand. "I'll take that as a yes." She turned back toward the evidence. "This court is deeply troubled." She paused before continuing. "The respondent has demonstrated careful financial planning, professional competence, and independent legal advice." She looked directly at me. "The petitioner, however, appears to have demonstrated a coordinated effort to obtain financial control through coercive means." Her written decision was issued that afternoon. The conservatorship petition was dismissed with prejudice. The unsigned agreement was declared unenforceable. The court also referred portions of the evidence to the Washington State Attorney General's office for further investigation into possible financial misconduct and attempted fraud. Benjamin quietly leaned toward me. "Your father would have been proud." I smiled. I think he already knew how this would end. 1 year later, my life looked almost nothing like it had before my 34th birthday. Glass Point Estate had become more than a home. It had become headquarters for the Morgan Cyber Ethics Foundation. Instead of luxury retreats and private parties, the estate hosted free educational programs for women rebuilding their financial independence after fraud, coercive control, and economic abuse. Cybersecurity workshops, legal education seminars, financial literacy courses. Every person who walked through the front gate arrived carrying a different story. Most left carrying something far more valuable than advice: confidence. Benjamin served on the foundation's advisory board. Noah volunteered his company's security team to teach digital privacy classes several weekends each year. As for my mother, the state investigation uncovered far more than anyone had expected. Internal auditors discovered unauthorized transfers between charitable accounts, conflicts of interest involving Olivia's proposed businesses, and several financial disclosures that had never been properly reported. Criminal charges followed months later. Richard eventually accepted a plea agreement after cooperating with investigators. Olivia avoided criminal prosecution, but lost every business partnership connected to the foundation. None of them contacted me again. Oddly enough, that felt less like losing a family, and more like finally escaping one. On the evening of my 35th birthday, I returned to the Grand Bellevue Hotel. Not because I missed that terrible dinner, because I wanted to replace the memory. The restaurant manager recognized me immediately. "Ms. Morgan, it's good to see you again." He smiled warmly. "Would you like the same private dining room?" I looked toward the hallway where everything had begun 1 year earlier. Yes, the same room. A few minutes later, I sat alone at the same table. Same windows, same skyline, same ceiling. I glanced upward. One of the small security cameras was still mounted discreetly in the corner of the room. Most guests probably never noticed it. I smiled. "Funny," I whispered to myself. "People always blame the camera." But the camera never created the truth. It simply refused to forget it. A waiter placed a small birthday dessert in front of me. One candle, one quiet flame. I blew it out and looked across the city lights reflecting on Elliott Bay. For years, I believed my father's greatest gift was the trust he left behind. I was wrong. His greatest gift was teaching me never to surrender my judgment simply because someone shared my last name. Family should never require blind obedience. Love should never demand signatures without understanding. And the truth doesn't become powerful because someone finally believes it. It becomes powerful because it remains true even when everyone else wishes it had never been recorded.
What impressed me most about this story wasn't Charlotte's wealth or the courtroom victory. It was her discipline. She never allowed anger to make decisions that evidence should make, instead. While her family relied on pressure manipulation and emotional guilt, Charlotte relied on patience, preparation, and facts. In many ways, the CCTV cameras became a symbol of something much bigger than surveillance. They represented objective truth in a situation where everyone else was trying to rewrite reality. Another powerful lesson is that manipulation often hides behind words like family, trust, and protection. Charlotte's mother insisted everything she did was for the family's benefit, but her actions revealed a completely different motive. The cameras didn't destroy the family. They simply exposed what had been happening behind polite smiles and carefully chosen words. I also admire Charlotte's father for teaching her a lesson that ultimately saved her future. Never sign what you don't fully understand, no matter who places it in front of you. That advice wasn't just about contracts, it was about protecting your independence and thinking for yourself. If there's one lesson to take away from this story, it's this: never let guilt replace good judgment. Real love respects your right to ask questions, to seek independent advice, and to make informed decisions. When truth is supported by evidence, manipulation eventually collapses under the weight of its own lies.